A very good evening and a warm welcome. The media in the recent days have been abuzz with numerous audio recordings alleged to be featuring high-profile figures in society coming to light. What's more, these are recordings of telephone conversations, and it is fair to say that at least one party in each of the said conversations might not have had any indication that their private conversations are being recorded. The matter has gone beyond the realm of mere social media gossip, with the contents of the recordings carrying great legal implications. But the contents of these recordings are not the topic we will be focusing on today, but the actions leading up to the recordings, ending up in the public domain, the element of privacy violation. How do you combat infringement of privacy? Does Sri Lanka have adequate tools to tackle it? To discuss this wide-ranging issue, we have invited to our studios digital media analyst, science writer, and somebody who has been quite vocal about a right to privacy. And you have also written a book, Mr. Nalaka Gunawardene. Warm welcome at Hyde Park.
Hello, glad to be here.
A lot of telephone conversations circulating in social media, in mainstream media. Have you listened to any of them?
Well, originally I thought I'll ignore this whole thing, but when fellow journalists called me and started asking for my views, I had to go and listen to a few to get a sense of what is being talked about. And the one person who's common to all these many conversations allegedly recorded is Mr. Ranjan Ramanayake, actor turned politician, parliamentarian, and it is he who's at the center of this controversy. What he did or is believed to have done, is it right, and then what are the implications? This is what we can talk about.
I wonder whether it's right for you to have listened to these conversations. I know it's on social media, but is that right for us to listen to somebody else's phone conversations?
In principle, if it is a conversation between A and B and I am eavesdropping, that's wrong, ethically, morally wrong. But if that's being made public and there is a public interest discussion going around it, building around it, then I would consider that as legitimate for us to at least find out for research and analysis purposes, what is this, what is being talked about.
But now these conversations have been recorded without the knowledge, as I said, of one party, at least one party involved in these telephone conversations. As you said, the alleged party who had recorded the conversation had not received the consent of the other party to record these conversations, which is why most of these conversations are quite unacceptable to certain parties, have legal implications on other parties. But let's talk about recording telephone conversations. For example, you and I can have a phone conversation. Is it right for somebody to record them, even if it is for legal purposes?
Well, there is a legal consideration, then there's the ethical consideration. So from ethical perspective, if I am having a telephone conversation with you and without telling you, without your consent or awareness, I record it, that is unethical. But right now, as much as I understand from my legal friends, it is not illegal, it does not break any law currently applicable in Sri Lanka to record that conversation even without informed consent. So look at what we know as the facts of this controversy. Mr. Ramanayake has been recording phone conversations between himself and various others. That much we believe is known and established. These digital audio recordings allegedly from his vast collection have leaked. How and in what manner we still don't know, but they have leaked and then they have found their way to various news websites, social media, as well as mainstream media. And then only a small part of that large pile of conversations is apparently out now. More than 100,000 such conversations are believed or speculated to exist. Among these conversations Ranjan had with public figures or people holding public office, as well as very private conversations with fellow actors and others. So those are less of a concern. It is the conversations with public office holders or public figures, where matters of public interest and significance are discussed, those are the ones that matter. But again, are these recordings authenticated? Now, we are discussing this, we are recording this on the 16th of January evening. And this morning in the newspapers, Ramanayaka was quoted as saying, it's not been established that that is his voice or his number involved in this controversy. So he's now been arrested and remanded, and he's now to go before a voice test by the government analyst on the 23rd of January. Hopefully the authenticity factor will be determined by then. Then the charges against him is, when he was arrested, interfering in the work of judges.
On the judicial proceedings, judiciary,
yes.
Independence of the judiciary.
Yes. So then it will be interesting to see what his defense would be, you know, if he is indeed the voice in these conversations that have leaked, and if he has been talking to judicial officers, it has serious political and judicial implications.
Now, this also takes me to some international issues, from WikiLeaks to the Watergate issue. We've seen how issues where privacy has been infringed, or telephone recordings of conversations of massive companies and enterprises have ended up bringing these enterprises down. Let's revisit these and talk about how privacy laws and privacy actions have been taken to safeguard one's or an enterprise's privacy in other countries, and how Sri Lanka is actually still way behind in addressing this issue.
Right. It's a big basket of concerns. I think, and my friend Professor Rohan Samarajiva had very clearly demarcated, there are two parts of this. One is, if I'm talking with you in a telephone conversation, and either you or I or both of us, we have a recording of it, and then later it is leaked. Then that is one. Then when you and I are talking, somebody else, not part of that conversation, a third party, it could be a spy, it could be from the telecom company, it could be from anywhere who's gained unauthorized access to that conversation, makes a recording and uses our conversation's content for some purpose, usually against our interests. That is somewhat different from one of us recording our conversations. The implications are also different. So when you look at Watergate incident, for example, the implication was that the then president of the United States, Richard Nixon, ordered ex-spies to illicitly listen to the opposition, the Democratic Party's officials and conversations, so as to gain advance privileged knowledge about their next election campaign. And so that, when it was exposed, led eventually to Nixon's resignation. He was impeached and he had to resign. So that is different from what has happened in this case, where one of the parties to the conversation has quietly, secretively recorded the conversation. There is no third party involved here. It is. But
these conversations, they were seized by law enforcement authorities, the recordings rather, and somehow they're out in mainstream media, social media. But how can this happen?
How did it go from police to the media is the big question. The police say that there was another scenario where a trishaw driver came and handed over to the police a hard drive that had been accidentally left behind by a passenger, who then turned it over to the authorities, and apparently that contained all these digitally recorded conversations. So whose word are we to believe? Is it seized directly by the police who investigated or who entered Ranjan's Ramanayaka's house, or is it what was left behind and turned over by the trishaw driver?
Right. We will be very careful also as we speak about this, because there is an ongoing court proceeding. But let's take a short commercial break at Hyde Park. We'll return to talk more after this. Welcome back at Hyde Park. Tonight we're talking about privacy laws, ongoing telephone conversations that are being released to social media and the implications on private lives. I think, Mr. Gunawardene, yes, there's a court proceeding ongoing about the implications in terms of the involvement in judiciary and matters pertaining to the judiciary. Let's leave that aside, but let's talk about some of these some other politicians, some leading female figures. They are involved in these conversations, and they are private conversations, as you very rightly said at the beginning. You and I, we've all listened to these conversations, we as journalists, to understand what's going on, what may have gone wrong. But again, thousands are listening to these conversations. And there are third parties also mentioned in these conversations. And sometimes we have them also on mainstream media. But how ethical is this? What should we understand here? The basis of using these telephone recordings in an ethical manner. We have to talk about all that in a country where privacy and ethical means of having conversations or listening to somebody's conversation or taping them haven't been given much priority or attention.
That's true. So where media's use of this content is concerned, it is completely against media ethics to use this material that has not been authenticated, that has not been verified as coming from these individuals. Now, in the case of Mr. Ranjan Ramanayaka, though, because he's a double public figure, he is an actor turned politician, and he is visible and vocal, and his voice is well known. So we can surmise that at least one of the parties to these conversations, the voice is somewhat authenticated, again pending the government analyst confirming it. But we don't know the voices of many of the others who are also in these recordings. So the media is using these unverified, unauthenticated digital content in reporting, and sometimes excerpts, sometimes the full conversations are being published, completely against media ethics. Now, just because some gossip website is doing it does not warrant or justify a respectable mainstream media outlet also doing it. So media is expected to verify and then also cross-check, and if there are third parties being mentioned, get their side of the story before publishing such contentious content. And in this instance, we see a number of mainstream media outlets violating and ignoring that basic media ethics.
What is the right of these third parties that are involved? Let's leave aside the two people, for example, you and I, who are having this conversation, but we're talking about another person, about their private lives. And their private lives are discussed, and these are in public. And imagine the damage caused to their ongoing lives and private lives. So how do they manage this? What do they do?
I'm not a lawyer. From what I understand, though, speaking to lawyers, is that there is very little redress available except civil defamation. A person who's been mentioned negatively and whose reputation is damaged by it may file a civil case of defamation.
How long will that defamation case take?
It's really tedious, time-consuming, and most people don't pursue that option. It's not really a practicable option. So very little redress available legally.
So if not for that, we have nothing to do here in Sri Lanka. I mean, if that happens to you and I.
Yeah, because in our constitution, a number of human rights as recognized as fundamental rights, the right to privacy is not one of them. Even in our legal system, the protection of privacy is not a general principle. It is applicable in a few specific instances, but not widely enough. So the right to privacy is not recognized, and privacy in general is not legally protected in our legal system. So there's a huge gap that we need to fill.
You talk about the gap, we move on to talk about WikiLeaks, something we mentioned at the beginning. Now, this was in recent times a massive issue internationally. Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, and the repercussions faced as a result of the US government actually monitoring his work and the kind of cables that he had leaked. So when we look at these things and when we link this to what's happening here in Sri Lanka, internationally, the United States has taken Assange down.
Tried very hard. Yes.
But yes, I mean, they brought different cases too. I mean, he was linked with several other cases, but that's not what we're trying to discuss here. Assange, WikiLeaks, and that is also a case pertaining to privacy.
Yes and no, because in the case of WikiLeaks, it is basically a digital platform that enables whistleblowers to release information, data that the whistleblowers believe to be of public interest and should come out. And so basically, it is public or corporate information, it's governmental information or company information that is being leaked through WikiLeaks. And basically Julian Assange and his small team of digital technical people created this facility where anyone can go and dump this data anonymously, and then the WikiLeaks staff would look at it, and if it is sufficiently of public interest, they will publish it. So the rule here, the principle here is governments and companies can't expect the same level of confidentiality protection or privacy protection as do individuals.
Now, in the case of WikiLeaks and Julian Assange as a whistleblower, he exposed contents or documents and conversations pertaining to the government. We remember Hillary Clinton being implicated, Donald Trump, but
public figures who held public office and whose conduct had implications for public affairs.
And they too had an issue about them when the public had the right to know this information.
Yes. So there are the tension between the public's right to know and the individual's right to privacy. When it comes to public figures, they don't enjoy the same level of privacy protection as do the ordinary people.
So can we come back to Sri Lanka and talk about this figure who is a public figure, and most of these others in conversation are also public figures? How does that work?
So it will be interesting to see what will be lined up in Mr. Ramanayaka's defense in the coming days and weeks. So one point might be that these matters, these conversations were captured because he felt they were in the public interest. Now, I cannot presume.
But I think he mentioned that after appearing, appearance with the law enforcement authorities, he came out and he spoke to media and he said, yes, this was a means of defense for me, referring to at recent times we saw then Minister Ranga Bandara, who was a telephone conversation, Apalita Ranga Bandara. So he was referring to that and saying that was his only defense to show his neutrality and his loyalty to the party. But having said that, this also implicates a lot of other lives.
It does. So it will be interesting to see how this case will pan out. But let's also acknowledge that before Mr. Ramanayaka, other newsmakers and news reporters have also been in the habit of routinely recording phone conversations. The late Mr. Lasantha Wickramatunge, whom I and many others knew and still respect, was one of them. He habitually recorded every telephone conversation. He had the device that was capable of it 10-15 years ago. Now, in his defense, he said, look, I'm an investigative journalist. People talk to me and I need to gather evidence before I go public. If any of my sources backs out under pressure or having changed his or her mind, I need to have my original conversations with them. So he justified it, but he continued to record every telephone conversation. And that's known in the journalistic community. There are others, politicians, journalists, who have been doing it before and after Mr. Wickramatunge. The technology for doing it has become a lot easier now that with any smartphone these days with an app, and if you have enough storage capacity in your phone, you can automatically or selectively record telephone conversations.
The late Lasantha Wickramatunge, a very senior and respected journalist, he recorded these conversations as part of his profession as a journalist. And but the problem
again, it will be interesting to see whether he
Yes.
told people that he was recording the conversations.
Correct. And also these, what we're talking about now, these are available in the public domain now. And that is the problem we're talking about. We'll speak about this when we come back after a short break. Welcome back. At Hyde Park, we're talking to Mr. Nalaka Gunawardene. I'd also like to go back to some incidents internationally. I have a list of them where privacy, hacking led to serious incidents where, like I said, corporates were brought down or individuals were exposed, governments were exposed, and again, apologies were made as a result. Legal action taken. I'd like to go back to the incident where Rupert Murdoch, this case, News of the World, to hide the scope of the phone hacking back then. It'll be interesting for you to link that, and we'd like to hear from you about how you link that incident with what's going on in Sri Lanka.
Right. So this happened about a decade and a half ago, beginning in 2006. It was revealed that News of the World, one of the sensational newspapers, sensationalist newspapers in the UK, owned by Rupert Murdoch's company, had been using recorded telephone messages. They've been hacking into telephone answering machines and other such legitimate everyday devices of crime victims of crimes and families, and their conversations with detectives and so on, so as to gather journalistic information and outdo everybody else in the media sphere, outdo the competition. So in Murdoch's media empire, the end justified the means, and when this came to light, there was a huge scandal. And in the end, in 2011, the outcome finally, after a prolonged hearing, is that he had to close down News of the World, the newspaper, which was the main publication that was implicated. But even other publications in his stable of newspapers were tainted by this.
Now, the scandalous recordings during the time of Princess Diana, and some of the conversations leading up to the death of the late princess. Now, these have also been in the highlight when we talk about privacy, these recordings being released into media, onto media. Some they come, and there's also some recordings that Princess Diana herself recorded, very controversial, about the Buckingham Palace, how she was treated. But that was an audio recording that she did. So there was no implication whatsoever. But then the Buckingham Palace had a problem with that, because she spoke about the treatment that she faced within that royal context. We're also talking about this at a time when Harry and his wife, they've decided to come out of royal affairs, considering what Princess Diana faced. But these are all world issues that we saw several years ago. But in recent times, we talk about Mitt Romney, the recordings there too, where he mentioned something about, my job is not to worry about those people, when he spoke about his campaigning. Now, these came out in the public and there are implications on them.
Yeah, I mean, where unauthorized capturing or listening in, eavesdropping to telephone conversations is concerned, this is as old as the telephone itself, invented in 1876, and within a few years there were phone networks in the West, and then afterwards around the world. The old days, they used to go to the telephone exchange and physically plug into lines and listen to what was being discussed. And then there is this practice of tapping telephones. Again, physically it was hard to do in the old days. Now, as technology advanced, it has become easier and possible to do it at a mass scale. So mass state-sponsored electronic surveillance of not just telephone conversations, but electronic mail and other digital exchanges between private individuals has become widespread. And again, we know that governments as well as corporates do this. to gather information that will give them a competitive advantage, or sometimes government try to justify it in the name of public or national security. The implication is that trust has been seriously eroded. Now, communications, conversations are based on trust, especially if these conversations are happening in private. We trust the other person that we talk to. We trust the surroundings, that it's not bugged and somebody is not eavesdropping and recording. There is a certain amount of trust built into these conversations.
Which is why most of these private conversations with explicit of explicit nature would have taken place.
So revelations like this and many others that you mentioned have little by little eroded that element of trust. So much so that today people are hesitant to talk on the telephone or even in face-to-face conversations, because we don't know what surrounding little devices may be capturing that conversation. So this will in time to come have a serious implication, anthropological implication, on whether humans talk to each other and how trust and confidentiality is maintained. That's on the one side, on the human side.
You're taking us to a whole different societal and social issue here.
Yes, but on the other hand, erosion of secrecy has public benefits when that secrecy is on the part of governments or large corporations, where we as citizens would like to know what they're doing. Not just governments, but even large corporations, some of which are bigger than many governments of the world. Now, the WikiLeaks kind of facility has enabled people within those systems, whether they are within governments or whether they are within large companies, who are disturbed by what is being done or being planned, to leak those plans or those decisions into the public domain. So in a way, 10 years ago, when the WikiLeaks Cablegate scandal erupted in late 2010, within a few weeks I wrote an essay which was published in a number of media outlets, both here and overseas. And I said, this is what I call the global glass house. Whether we like it or not, we are increasingly living in a glass house. You know, the old adage, you know, if you are in a glass house, be careful when you change clothes and all that. So that was at a small scale. But today, thanks to advances in technology, surveillance and all that, everybody can spy on everybody else. And nobody's secrets are absolute. So in a way, welcome to the global glass house, I said. And I then said, where will this take us when it comes to diplomacy, for example? That part of that has to be done in secrecy, in confidence. When diplomats can't trust that their confidential communications or conversations don't stay that way, what happens to diplomacy? What happens to certain other areas of human affairs that rely on confidentiality between, say, a patient and a medical practitioner, between a lawyer and his client? If everything is likely to be eventually leaked or released,
how do we confide in somebody?
Deal with it? So this is a huge challenge in the global glass house. At a larger scale, this is the challenge that we as a human race confront today.
As we talk about all that, I mean, I like how you spoke about where we are heading to as humankind. Right to privacy, secrecy, confidentiality, and all this together, we talk about the implications to human society because of the advancements in technology. But Mr. Gunawardene, here now, what do we do? Because we found technology. We're the ones who brought the advancements to technology. But at the same time, we must be able to think about how we combat the issues. Right to privacy, basic human right. When it comes, we talk about right to speech, but then how do we secure this? And in Sri Lanka, we're way behind.
We're behind even India. Our neighbor, Supreme Court of India in middle of 2017 ruled, and it was a landmark judgment which recognized that all Indian citizens have the right to privacy. And it told the Indian government, don't spy on your citizens effectively. So we don't have that kind of high judicial dictum or ruling. We don't have specific right to privacy protected in our fundamental rights. And it's not just telephone conversations. Think of drones. As more and more drones with auto recording, video recording cameras roam around, nobody can have a private moment in their garden that they don't want to be captured by any overflying drone. So think of not just the telecom networks, but also drones and other devices and little increasingly hard to detect cameras left in public places, in changing rooms, in toilets. All these suggest that it is urgent, very urgent, that we first recognize the right to privacy of citizens and then legislate for adequate safeguards and protection of it. And then we have systems, institutions that'll enable those laws to be implemented. The right to data protection is only a part of that larger conversation.
Right.
A draft bill for that has been drafted last year for protecting personal data, but not the full range of privacy.
I'd like to talk about data protection also and about ethics. That is something we have to talk about. The final few minutes of Hyde Park will return after a short break. Welcome back. You're joining us at Hyde Park. Mr. Gunawardene, as we went in for a short break, we spoke about existing privacy laws in Sri Lanka in terms of data protection, the bill, and how far behind and how lagging we are in this area. But something we can talk about and look at is, we say the United States, we say it's a developed country. US laws on recording phone conversations, we speak about these. I was just going through them. There are federal and state wiretapping laws that may limit your ability to record phone conversations. These laws not only expose you to the risk of criminal prosecution, but I can read all this. But then when you come to Sri Lanka, there have been previous incidents, previous breaches of privacy through wiretapping phones in Sri Lanka, where a former minister accused the previous government of wiretapping and using equipment to record conversations. But here in Sri Lanka, what is the possibility of doing that? Yes, sometimes the state may need to tap phone conversations for requirements of the state, for the sovereignty of the nation, they may say. But how does this apply to individual lives and those in government?
That's the interesting question. So under the prevailing telecom law, the Telecommunications Act number 27 of 1996, it prohibits blanket surveillance of personal communications. However, in the same law, it says the minister in charge of the subject, telecommunications, may sanction the interception of communications for investigating a criminal offense and some other circumstances.
So the minister has the authority?
Yes. Now, the minister, or in the case of an ongoing criminal case, a judge can also permit the police to do surveillance.
Right.
But when surveillance is initiated by the state without having a judge ordering it, there is no judicial supervision of it, as far as I know. And also in some countries, when somebody becomes under surveillance, that person has to be informed. Sir, we are now following your phone conversations and your emails. Be aware. There's no such requirement here.
Just like when we call certain call centers or corporates where they say this call may be recorded for future training or reference.
Yes.
So I don't think this party we're talking about said that.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Yes.
So to that extent, under certain circumstances, state surveillance, electronic, including phone surveillance, is warranted in our country under the telecom law. But we know that not just for criminal investigations, not just persons of interest for national security, but going way beyond that, governments in this country have placed under surveillance opposition politicians, public intellectuals, critical journalists, social activists, and so on, to find out what they are up to or what they are planning. And that is a serious invasion of those individuals' right to privacy.
We talk about privacy, but where we do not have laws, let's as a society think about what we can do, where we can fix this until the laws come in place, until we bring adequate laws like in other countries. You gave us a good example where neighboring India, had a verdict on ensuring that right to privacy should be ensured. But in Sri Lanka, why can't we teach our society ethics?
We can and we should. Pending legislation that will make right to privacy a fundamental right and safeguards are introduced. Until that happens, we can only rely on ethics and our own personal ethics. But I sometimes wonder, Indeewari, whether we as a society value privacy. Historically, as well as even today, we are a very gossipy society in general, When you meet someone, even if you don't know that person very well, then the third, fourth, fifth question is, are you married? Are you having children? What was your school? What school did you attend?
And you know about that one, no?
Yes, that one, this one. And so finding connections is gossipy. And sometimes it goes beyond the needs of a conversation. So in a way, I don't know whether we value privacy as a notion, as a concept, as some other societies do. But be it as it may, in modern societies, we need to ensure that everyone's right to privacy is protected and safeguarded. If some individuals choose to ignore those protections and say, my life is an open book, anyone can come and pry into my private lives, then in the case of those individuals, there can be prying and paparazzi and all that.
When you say we don't give too much of attention or emphasis to privacy, it sounds like, people who are implicated also may, or the society may not have much of a problem about these being exposed, although you and I speak about this.
Yeah, the other question I have about these individuals who have spoken to Mr. Ramanayake, allegedly spoken to Mr. Ramanayake, is, shouldn't they have been more careful? Where is judgment and decorum and discretion when it comes to discussing controversial, contentious judicial matters or political matters in a telephone conversation, knowing that the possibility of this being spied upon exists?
Or maybe under surveillance by the state?
By the state or by that telecom company. The telecom company, in theory, has access to everything that you and I transact through their networks. Although in some advanced technologies and applications through encryption, that possibility has been minimized and contained. But
that is also when it comes to apps and certain social media.
But for voice communications, for the most part, that possibility exists. Now, these individuals have disregarded those possibilities and have been, quite shooting their mouths off, I would say. And now the fallout is beginning to affect one by one many of those participants in the conversations.
And it also takes this conversation back to where you said it's good that these conversations were out when it comes to certain conversations exposing how the judiciary was influenced or how the law has been bent.
Yes, but also imagine how many more exist and how, in what other ways these digitally captured conversations could be used for purposes of blackmail, for coercion, or worse. So we don't know. The possibilities are endless, and all we can do is speculate, and we don't know the extent of this controversy of this particular individual's capturing and storing and what he intended to do, what he has already done. All this hopefully will come out in an impartial, thorough investigation.
What would you do if you were implicated or if you were in the middle of all this?
Meaning if I had a conversation with him?
With him.
Well, I've met this gentleman a couple of times in person, in a public events. But what would I do? Well, in the first instance, I'm generally careful on what I say and how I say it in telephone conversations or even in emails. So that's the first line of defense. guard your mouth. Guard what we say and how we say it.
But let's talk about those who are implicated, those individuals. I mean, even third parties, we spoke about them at the beginning. Some of their names are mentioned, and this is in mainstream. We don't even know whether they're right, wrong, or whether they have done this. These are two individuals who are talking about another party who has no idea that their name has been discussed. But they're also popular figures maybe, or they may be somebody who's less known in society. But then, if you are one of them, what do we do? I know we spoke about defamation laws, which are
not a realistic option, actually.
What do we do in Sri Lanka if this happens?
The right to reply in the event a mainstream media outlet uses something implicating me and damaging my reputation. Under the media ethics of this country, and the Sri Lanka Press Institute has codified some media ethics. There, the right to reply is recognized, at least as far as the print media is concerned. So, if a newspaper subscribing to those ethics violates that and tarnishes somebody's reputation, then the right to reply, right to clarify and explain my own side should exist. Again, we know that in practice this doesn't always happen. Newspapers can be very dismissive even when they have been in the wrong and maligned or tarnished reputations. Where broadcast radio and television are concerned, there is no such framework of media ethics yet.
And also
we need to evolve.
Now.
Social media, where there are gossip websites and there are news websites and there are individual users of social media. So there are these different categories. The Web Journalists Association of Sri Lanka 2 years ago also adopted their own set of ethics. But not enough news websites have yet subscribed to these ethics. So again, there is an advocacy challenge arising from all this. We need to push television and radio stations to evolve their own ideally common set of ethics that will govern their conduct. We would like more and more responsible news websites to also either subscribe to what is already being drafted, what has been formulated by the Web Journalists Association, or adopt something from international best practice. And as for gossip sites, they are out of control. Mind you, they have some of the highest visits and hits in terms of who follows them.
So maybe they could start practicing and be exemplary and lead the way so that the others will follow, because
in an ideal world, yes.
Yes.
But let's start with the mainstream media. Extend, or advocacy can then extend to the news websites, gossip websites and individual social media users. But in this country still 90% of the people get their news and current affairs from television and radio. That's where we need to advocate ethical media conduct even more than social media that's used by 35% of the population.
Right. Thank you very much for your time here. I think it was a very timely conversation. I'm sure our viewers had much to take home from this conversation.
Thank you. Pleasure talking to you.
We had with us Mr. Nalaka Gunawardene joining us to talk about privacy laws in Sri Lanka and what measures we have in Sri Lanka if you are implicated in a similar case. Thank you for watching us at Hyde Park. Good night.